Hey guys, Peter here to tell you about the litters from Origin Chaosmos, out June 3rd on Nuclear Blast. This album has 8 tracks, 44 minutes in length, and this is the band's 8th full-length studio album. They are an American technical, brutal death metal band. Now, when you look at a record from a band like this that has that specific blend of technicality with brutality, it's very easy to get lost in the weeds of the record, of the sound, of the experience. It's not the case with this album because it has a really well-defined design structure, and the soundscape really has a positive impact on that same design, on that same structure. Actually, one is the consequence of the other. So when you look at the design of this album, they did a wonderful job alternating tracks in order for you to get more of one experience and less of the other from track to track, so that there is no sense of necessarily continuity, or the album doesn't allow itself to feel or sound repetitive at any single turn. And this is important in order for the listener to stay engaged, in order for the listener to feel like there are ebbs and flows, that the album moves well and it stays moving across each and every single track, and you're not necessarily looking backwards but always looking forward in terms of what the experience of the album is going to give you at the next turn. So I really enjoyed this design, I really enjoyed this structure. It definitely enhances the playability of the album. Now, once you get into the soundscape, this record really feels like a perfect blend of technical, brutal death metal. You see elements of all three genres, of the technical side, of the brutal side, and then the more classic death metal sound. And it's not an album that necessarily defines which path is the most predominant. I honestly don't feel like there is one. I feel like the strength of the record is taking the elements out of these three genres and then creating its own soundscape, creating its own signature sound for the band and for the record. An album that stays very clear in what it's trying to do sound-wise. You don't see the murkiness of the sound. They didn't get lost within the brutality of the album and allow that brutality to dictate exactly what the experience is going to be all about. This is a record that feels heavy, sounds heavy, it is brutal at times, it is technical at times, but it doesn't matter exactly where you are within the album, where you are within the sound experience. The clarity of that sound is always present from start to finish. The overall quality of mixing production on this album really elevates the overall feel of the record and how this album comes across. It's an album that has texture, it's an album that has depth, that has substance, that has layers, but it's so easy to digest, it's so easy to process, that allows that complexity that the record has to feel very straightforward, to feel very simple. It's a simple album to listen to, and it doesn't try to overcomplicate itself. Now, within that soundscape, two elements jump into the forefront: drums and obviously guitars. As far as the drums goes, there are some things that I like, and there are some things that I wish were done slightly different. I like the fact that the drums use themselves in order to create the backbone of the experience of this record. A lot of the movement, a lot of the heaviness, a lot of the brutality of this album has the starting point in the drums, and then it escalates itself into the guitars, into the vocals. So that is an important aspect because it allows you to feel like the starting point is always exactly the same one on every single track, regardless in which direction the songs then go afterwards. What I would like to see differently on the drum side is I would like to see the drums feel a little bit stronger in terms of the essence that they have, in terms of how deep they become with their sound. At times they felt a little bit too straightforward. They didn't have a strong impact. They didn't come across powerful, and you could have the drums being powerful. That doesn't mean they're going to overshadow the technicality and the brutality that you're going to get out of guitars and vocals. I think there's room for everything on this record, and I wish the drums were turned a little bit higher, that the depth of their sound, the substance of their sound felt a little bit warmed, felt a little bit more conducive to the overall feeling of the record, because right now it's an album that has that starting point in the drums but only really explodes once the guitars and vocals come into the scene. And as far as the guitars are concerned, I love the diversity that this album has in store for the listener. On the technical side, I like the fact that it is a technical album, but it's not overly done from that perspective. It's still easy for the average listener to appreciate the technicality, to appreciate what they're doing, where it's going, and the nuances that it's creating. When it comes down to the brutality side, the guitars could also be very heavy, very driven, very direct, also adding some melody into the mix and then some more traditional death metal sounds. So the guitars are very diverse. They're very stretched out in terms of where they're piggyback off as far as the experience, as far as the soundscape, as far as the drive of this record is concerned. But they're definitely one of the focuses of the entire album. It's impossible to listen to this record from start to finish or in any other format and not realize how important that the guitar sound is for the overall album, and also how diverse that sound is and the experience that that sound are given. You could really see all the different influences of those three different genres coming together, blending as one, allowing them to coexist with one another in order for these tracks to be very dynamic, to have tons of ups and downs, feeling almost like a roller coaster ride, not just from song to song, but even within tracks themselves. And that volatility doesn't stop with the guitars. The same way the guitars allow the album to explode musically so you could feel the brunt of its brutality, the same could be said for the vocals. They're doing exactly the same thing, and they're very dynamic as well. They're not one-size-fits-all approach from beginning to end. They have that core bass that really grounds the record, that brings the essence of the album down, that feels really deep, that adds a little bit of texture, the kind of texture that I wanted out of the drums. You really feel it from the vocals, but then they also go a little bit wider. They go a little bit off the beaten path, they stretch themselves out, you get a higher pitch, you get a higher tone, a higher delivery, adding aggression to the overall brutality and intensity that the album has. This life that the vocals give the album is really important so that all the different moving parts of this record move at the same time in the same direction with that same starting point. Overall, I love the complex simplicity of this album. That's the best way to describe this record, because it's an album that is not simple, but it feels very simple and very easy to listen to. And because of that, it's easy for you to stay connected with it, it's easy for you to appreciate it, and then come back to it time and time and time again. Love the album, love the design, love the approach. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Chaosmos, the title of the album, the title track. And I love the brutality that this song has, both vocally and musically. It's a very driven track. The guitars and drums really move the track well. They add substance to that movement. And then you have the vocals sitting right on top of everything else, kind of guiding the experience, directing which direction this song is going to take. It's a track that has a great sense of continuity from start to finish, regardless of all the ebbs and flows that exist within the track, because there's tons of them. It's a song that never really stays compact, that never follows a single path. It changes, it morphs, it grows, but it always has a way of finding its way back to that same path, to that same starting point. That is the beauty of this track. It goes off the beaten path, but it always finds a way to come back to it again. So you never lose track of the song, and you never lose complete disconnection with how the song feels. The closing section of this track, it's a complete reset of everything that you heard up until that point, and that is an exclamation mark that they added to the overall construction and soundscape. Next you have Decolonizer, a more dynamic track. This track is even more dynamic. It moves even more vocally and musically. It has a lot more life. It has a lot more volatility built into it. At times you can feel within the sections, within the different sections that this song has, those sections are straight to the point. But because there's so many of them, because the song moves and morphs and grows and expands and contracts so much, the overall track feels a little bit more volatile than what it really is under the surface, because all of those different pieces are very direct, they're very connected, and they're very, very balanced within themselves. It's just that when you put so many of them together in one single track, the overall feel of the track is that it's pulling you in a lot of different directions. It takes a lot of different shapes, but always stays true to what its original intentions were, to what its original goal and path was. And the solo section on this track is absolutely brilliant. Brilliant. My favorite solo section in the entire record is in this song. It just feels beautiful. It's explosive. It's dynamic. It has intensity. It has aggression in its beauty and its harmonies. It's just freaking phenomenal. It really adds value to all the mobility that the track has. It adds value to all the movement, construction, and soundscape that they included in this song. Last but not least, Cullscape. The atmosphere on this track is really what sets the track apart, because sound-wise, you're going to find a lot of songs very similar from a construction and soundscape perspective, but this track feels darker to me. And it's hard to put your finger on it in terms of what's creating that sense of darkness. Now, that sense of darkness is there at the beginning, and it's not necessarily staying as impactful as it is at the beginning of the track for the rest of the song. So it kind of fades out, that feeling kind of fades out into the brutality, into how driven the song is. But once you set the tone at the beginning and you feel that somber nature that the track has, it's very hard to shake it off, even if it's not going to be there in the forefront, even if it's not going to dictate exactly how the song comes about. But it still plays a role in how you perceive this track and how you walk away from this song. Because like I said, everything else within it feels very familiar with songs that came before. That introduction of that darkness at the beginning is what sets the mood of the track for the rest of the track, and it's what's going to reset your perception of this song versus the rest of the album. This is it. Origin with Chaosmos, out June 3rd on Nuclear Blast. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.